This time I have my microphone on. I recorded 2 full episodes without checking that that thing was actually off and disconnected. So let's do this again. So in this episode, we are now moving on to a new part, which is pretty important to the visual novel, especially for the players, and that is getting into the auto-read capability, where the system can estimate about how much time it might take for a human to read the line that's on screen before auto-advancing to the next one. So it's gonna go ahead and guide you through the story, and you don't have to click or anything. You can just sit back and relax and read at a casual pace. And you can also skip in case you want to skip through certain sequences or different parts of dialogue. That's the capability. So we're gonna make use of these 2 buttons down here. I just had to check my volume again and make sure that was on. Now I'm paranoid. Okay, well, enough about that though. So before we actually get into that, we need to change one small thing, and that is upgrade from the old input system and move into the new input system. As from this point on, we're going to start getting into some newer features that will make better use of the new input system we have and a new input controller that we're going to work with. So let's go ahead and set up that. Right now, we're just using the legacy system. If we look at the player input manager and open up the script there, you can see that we're using input.getKeyDown and getKeyDown for spacebar and return, so that way we can prompt the advance and make the dialogue system move on to the next. So we're handling that right here. That's the old system, so we're going to upgrade to the new and much more flexible input system that Unity has made. To do that, we'll open the window and go to the package manager and just search inside of Unity registry for the input system and go ahead and install that. Now when it finishes installing, you should receive a pop-up warning saying that it wants to switch to the new input system, and it gives you an option to say yes or no. Since I've already done this and I'm re-importing it for the second time, it's looked like it's not giving me that window, but just go ahead and say no, because we're going to configure that ourselves. Let's go ahead and head to the Edit tab and into the project settings and open up the player, and inside of other settings, if we scroll down to the configuration and active input handling, let's switch from the old input manager to use both. We're not going to switch to the new input system only because our testing scripts will still make use of the legacy system. Once we go to export the game, we'll switch over to the new system entirely and we'll remove all of the old code. But let's go ahead and make sure that we're using both of them for testing purposes. And apply, which will go ahead and save your scene and restart Unity. Once Unity's back up, we now have access to the new and wonderful input system. So if we go to our VM controller to managers and the player input manager, there are a couple ways that we can handle our own input. And that is we could create our own code to manage the player input, or we can use this component called player input, which is provided by Unity. If we go ahead and just add that component to our player input manager, then what this is a component that takes an input action asset and controls all the different the bindings in there for the keys and what keys go to what actions, and then it executes code when those actions are pressed. So we're going to go ahead and just use this system that's already in place, but we're going to put our input manager on top of it, so that way we can customize it and add our own actions. But this is all we'll need for the visual novel, so it's perfect. But we do need an input action asset to assign. So inside of our main folder, let's create a new folder called input. And inside of here, we'll create and scroll all the way to the down. How'd you like that term? And let's open up the input actions. Then we'll create a new asset, and we can just call this visual novel input. And so now we have an input action. So if we open this up, what we get is a window where we can create action maps and actions. And action maps are basically just groups of controls that are clustered into a certain particular map, like say general controls. Maybe a player has land controls versus water controls. You get the idea. You can change key bindings and how things work by changing your maps. For a visual novel, we'll really only need one, maybe two, but we'll get to that later on. For now, let's just make a map called general and stick with one action, as we only have one thing we need to run for the moment. And that's going to be our next action. This is going to be what's going to trigger our dialogue system to move to the next line in the conversation. So we have no binding, but let's go ahead and choose a path and click listen and then hit our space key. And now we get the space as an option, and now it is bound to next. So whenever we hit the space bar, next is going to be triggered along with whatever function is assigned to it. Let's go ahead and add one more binding and make sure that the path for this one is our enter key. And now we have space and enter that will both trigger next. So we can go ahead and save the asset, close that, open our player input manager, and make sure that the visual novel input is assigned to that. Next thing we want to do is we just want to make sure that the behavior is changed from send messages to invoke Unity events, since we're going to be using Unity events and actions to be executed when these keys are pressed. And so now that only leaves us with having to create our input manager and the code to go with it to control all these different keys. So we'll go ahead and do that in the next part. For now, we've got our system set up and we can use the new input system, so that's good. Let's go on to the next one and let's get this started.